In this lecture, we're going to briefly talk about servers. In the previous lecture, we ran a command that started a server for us. We were able to view our application in the browser by visiting a special URL. Let's examine the URL closely. Our browser is pointing to a URL called localhost followed by some random numbers. What is localhost? What do these numbers represent? Our application is being served by a server. Let's explore what that means. A server is a machine similar to our personal computers. One of the major differences between a server and our computers is that there is no GUI. We can't click on icons, buttons, or view graphics in general on servers. So what's the point of having a server? A server can have software installed on them for handling network requests. The job of a server is to listen for incoming requests. Whenever we type a URL in the address bar of a browser, the browser will initiate a request to a server. The server is responsible for responding with some data. This can be a file like an HTML, image, CSS, or JavaScript file. The job of a server is to hold a copy of our application. The main benefit is not having to maintain the server on our machines. We don't have to purchase the hardware, set up, or maintain a server. There are services available that specialize in hosting applications on servers. Up until now, our application has been working without the need for a server. We've been opening files directly in the browser. We're going to be using some advanced features of the browser. Browsers limit features if we open files directly in the browser. This includes HTML files. Here's where our problem begins. We need a server to host our application. Luckily, we won't need to write a server. Vite provides a server out of the box. It allows for developers to continue writing Vue applications without having to worry about running a server. In the address bar, our app is delivered by a URL called localhost. Localhost is a special URL we can type in the address bar. If we type localhost, the browser treats the request differently. Instead of sending the request to a server located somewhere in the world, the request will be sent to our computer. This allows our computers to handle the request. Vite will run a server on our computers that can handle the request if we type in localhost. The server will respond with the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files we have in our project. We don't need to write a single line of code to get this functionality working. That's great because it allows us to focus on our app. The CLI adds additional features to our project that make the development experience easier. The server will watch for file changes in our project. If a file is updated, the server will refresh the browser to show the latest changes. That saves us time from having to refresh the browser ourselves. There's a whole lot of other things the CLI can do for us which we'll learn about as the course progresses. There's one last question. What do the numbers represent? This part of the URL represents the port number. You can think of ports as doors to a house. A house can have numerous entrances. One door leads to the kitchen, another leads to the bathroom, so on and so forth. Similarly, servers have ports for accessing different parts of a server. The browser needs to know which door on the server leads to the application. Multiple applications can exist on a server. We need to assign a port for our app. By default, the CLI will assign the app to a port for us. The port can be specified in the URL by adding a colon after the domain. This character is followed by the port number. Normally, we would never have to add the port number to the URL. For example, let's change the URL to google.com. The port number is not necessary for this URL. The reason we don't need to add a port number is because most browsers will default to port 80. Most applications are configured to be delivered over port 80 on the server. Port 80 is the recommended port when shipping an app to production. So why does CLI use a different port? Only one application can be assigned to a port. You can't have multiple apps using the same port. On most personal computers, it's possible that port 80 may have been taken. Luckily, computers have thousands of unused ports. The CLI will search for an unused port. It'll reserve the port for our application. This way, we can view the app on our machines locally. That wraps it up for now. We can tell the browser to access our server by typing in localhost in the URL. We don't have to worry about the restrictions imposed by the browser because we have a server to deliver our app. In the future, we'll look at how we can upload the app to a server for production. For now, we'll be working locally.